Hello and good morning to everyone tuning in to the latest Reuters Events webinar, this time on the topic of sustainability and supply chain. An effective sustainability strategy is increasingly one of the defining features in an optimized supply chain. However, implementing that strategy is easier said than done. And so today we'll be discussing a range of sustainability initiatives. We'll be looking at the changes you can make to your logistics operations to help drive down emissions, as well as thinking about how reverse supply chains and reprocessing operations can help to dramatically reduce waste. But to begin, I'd like to introduce our panelists, starting off with Ante. Ante, can you please introduce yourself and your organization?
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I suppose that we have a person all over the world, so I wish you welcome to this, and I'm really glad to have been invited as a panelist for this interesting topic. So my name is Ante Fassa. I'm the Vice President of Purchasing for Indirect Material and Logistics for Electrolux Group. And I'm glad to be invited to this discussion because, as you can imagine, if you know 2 or 3 things about Electrolux, if I can just share some word about how our company is completely engaged in our sustainability journey. So Electrolux is a Swedish company, and one of our targets that all the top management had taken it about climate neutrality and have the decarbonization of our value chain by 2050. So it's completely integrated in our strategy. So with our products, we design products that help customers also to use in the way that they are using our products, the washing machine, the cookers, etc., to reduce also their environmental footprints. So we are also have ambition to inspire conscious behaviors on footprint reduction. And we are really all of the company, every employee is engaged on these directions. And if I can also share some more, the group had reduced the scope 1 and 2 on gas emission, with our direct and indirect operation. And we are also going beyond the reduction of our scope 3 emission. And here we have a big role to play because we are really working hand to hand with our key supply chain partners to support this ambition. And we are also working on reaching our 2025 science-based targets. So we are 3 years ahead of the plan, and we are really on a good path. And all this, again, we will talk about it. I'm sure that we'll have opportunity to talk about it today. It's completely done with the full engagement of our supply chain partners and having a strong strategy with all our organization, supply chain and purchasing working hand to hand to identify all opportunities and also to engage with all the ecosystem to reach this neutrality target.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining us today, Ante. That sounds really interesting.
Thank you for the invitation.
Looking forward to hearing more about that later in the webinar. And Hans, please could you now introduce yourself and your organization?
Sure. Yeah. Also, thanks very much for having this opportunity to join and share some experience from my end. I have a background in mechanical engineering and have been in various supply chain roles in high-tech industry predominantly, and now working for Philips. And Philips is in the high-tech sector. Many of you will probably know Philips. We are in health tech. With multiple solutions in health tech, going from big health tech systems to small devices and also personal health appliances. So health and well-being is in the core of our goals. And yeah, actually that with health and well-being, there is a very close relation and also to sustainability and the wide topic of sustainability. So we have incorporated sustainability in our visions, and targets have been set, very ambitious targets. And what I think is nice is that in Philips we are taking circularity quite seriously, with ambitious targets also to take back devices that we have delivered to the market and really look into that perspective of circularity, whereby we have already quite some experience on the large medical equipment. But on the recent time, and that's also where I'm involved, is also looking into the smaller medical devices, even going to the small appliances and sensors, for instance. And for that, one of my current projects is, for instance, in the European DICE program, where together with consortium partners, we are looking to solutions for digital health devices. And just to provide you an example, we're talking then about this kind of sensors containing high-end electronics, mostly for single use. And then the challenge is like, okay, how do we set up a supply chain to really have a cost-effective way to bring these back and reuse these as often as possible?
Thank you, Hans. That's a really interesting angle. I can't wait to hear more about it. It's really great to have you both here to discuss this topic. But before we start, I want to say to our audience, firstly, thank you so much for joining us. And secondly, we also want you to hear what you have to say today. And so we'll be conducting 2 interactive polls during today's webinar. I'll start the first poll now. Our question for this poll is, it's about the challenges of sustainability. We'll be asking you, what do you think is the greatest difficulty when it comes to driving sustainability in your supply chain? Short-term costs, lack of expertise, securing internal support for change, collaborating with partners, or a lack of visibility? I'm going to launch that now, and we will refer back to that later on. And so I can see people are already voting on it now, which is great. And I'll come back to that later on, and I will we'll discuss it with Anta and Hans and see what they think about your responses. As well as this poll, we'll be taking questions throughout this webinar. And so if you would like to ask our panelists anything, please add it to the Q&A section of the call. And if we have time, we'll get around to them. Now, back to our panelists. I wanted to start, both of you, just by asking, when it comes to sustainability, where at the moment are you seeing space for innovation? Anta, if we start with you.
Yes, it's a good question. And for me, it's really referred to our group purchasing strategy based on 5 pillars. And 2 of these pillars are innovation and sustainability. But we really realized that to reach our sustainability ambition, it cannot be done without innovation, and they are really essential to tackle climate change challenge. So as I was saying at the beginning, part of our long-term ambition is the decarbonization of our entire value chain to be net zero emission by 2050. So it's a challenging ambition. And to succeed on that, we need to work hand to hand with all our supply chain partners to develop. So we are talking about co-development, test, solution. And these innovative solutions should help us to generate less CO2 emission, and to use also innovation not only on execution and operational, saying that let's find a way to reduce energy consumption, for example, but it's also use innovation to follow and measure. Because if we reduce them and if we find concrete solution, but then we do not have really the right approach, the right tools to follow and measure the progress, we cannot really see where we are. So it's about using innovation for the full, for the 360 process. And we can say that also sustainability today, it's present in all our supply chain logistics hubs. So I can give you more details later, but we have initiative on ocean shipping, on trucking, on warehousing, and again, using less energy in warehousing. And we are really keeping strong connection with our supplier to support their innovation roadmap. In our business review with all our strategic suppliers, we always include a part where we are really willing to looking for where they are on our innovation, how they are investing, and offer them also internally an opportunity to test and pilot solution. So it's also about openness from Electrolux to test new things, and we are learning by doing. And it's also to offer to our key strategic partner a sort of playground where all these innovation can be tested, can be evaluated, and again, we just take benefits of our expertise, because we have our internal team with high level of expertise on a lot of different stuff. So how we can combine all this together to reach this common goal of climate change challenge and carbon neutrality.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for that. Hans, is everything okay, Hans? I heard a crash. That sounded quite...
Yeah, there was a crash here, but it's okay. Yeah.
Okay. I'm glad to hear it. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this question of innovation and sustainability. Like, where are you seeing innovation from your perspective?
Yeah, I'm fully with Anta, because there's lots of very interesting domain when we take sustainability in the full range of supply chain and supply chain management, going from procurement to logistics, to sustainable operations, reduction of waste in operations, and also circularity. And for me, the most exciting area is also that circularity angle, because thinking about, of course, we have to do something to stop the use of the resources from the globe, because we will have scarcity if we continue linear pulling resources from our globe. We can only use materials once. When realizing that, when I came into this topic, I realized this is really an area for innovation, because we have worked for many decades on building linear supply chains. And circularity means really rethinking the setup of our supply chains. A circular supply chain is something completely different. We can use what we've learned in the past, but we must really innovate to make it work.
Okay, so thank you for your answer, Hans. And just to kind of follow on from that, could you talk about maybe some of the sustainability initiatives that you are actually seeing right now? I know you've used your example just then at the start of that sensor, but could you explain some of these initiatives in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, very good. So indeed, we over the past 15-20 years, Philips has already been working on circularity for the large medical equipment. That is quite capital intensive, and also there you see very good cases to make them circular, cases to take them back, refurbish, bring them back to the market, or also recover the valuable spare parts. So there's an area that we built experience, but that's in a scope whereby that value, the intrinsic value of the systems, is very high. And that's indeed where now for the innovation, it's like now also the question mark, like, okay, it's great that we can do something for the bigger equipment, but now what about if we get higher volumes and lower value products? So then it comes becomes a real challenge also for supply chain, because then you kind of have to compete with linear supply chain, whereby the cost of your take back, reprocessing, and all those activities that you have to do to reuse have to be competitive with fairly low prices of the linear products and components. And so that is really, let's say, the project that we're working on. So there, projects that we started on was on smaller medical devices. Think, for instance, about hospital patient monitors, already smaller, and also a challenge because there's quite larger quantities across the globe. And the example I just showed, that sensor, that moves into the domain of the consumables, whereby the PCBA used have a far lower price and value, and the challenge becomes even more like, okay, how can I get them back and reprocess them in a very cost-effective way, and also what needs to be the business model for it.
Okay, thank you. That's a really interesting thought. And Ante, could I just ask you the same question about the specific initiatives that you're dealing with in your area, in your departments? So
Yeah.
what they are and how they work and what the intention is.
Yeah, sure. Talking about my area, where we are talking about procurement, purchasing for logistics suppliers, the focus is developing supplier capacity to improve sustainability performance. So we are willing to inspire our key partners to tackle climate change and help them to develop their capacity to improve their sustainability performance. So there is a lot of ongoing initiatives. So I will mention maybe two of them. The first one is one initiative that are really touching all the purchasing ecosystem of Electrolux. It's what we call the CDP program. I don't know if you are all familiar with CDP, but CDP, it's a non-profit international organization that driving environment assessment. So this year, I think we are on the year 4 of our yearly disclosure, where we involve all our key strategic partners, and we focus on emission data for scope 1 and 2. And we analyze the intensity, the report of the emission data, etc. So it's about assess where they are today, using this CDP program to assess where they are on their sustainability journey at a yearly basis and the impact. All the training with the suppliers. Again, we are taking this role of inspire them, train them, make us sort of really be the be really driver and open awareness on our ecosystem about all the climate change impact. So about training, open awareness, because it's really for us a change management program, and drive improvement. It's also said to people, to our partners, let's assess where you are. And when we see the results, let's work together. Let's identify the pain points. Let's work together to drive improvement program, and let's support you to improve. So year over year, to identify key points with our key partners that we are improving. And then we are also looking for integrating sustainability in our decision-making process. So we have internal decision-making process where we will decide for which project to go with supplier A or supplier B. And not only looking for the quality, the risk, the cost, but also integrating now sustainability element in this decision-making process. So here it's really about the first, let's say, action that we started. Is really, we need to have the visibility on where they are on their sustainability journey, their emission of CO2 emission. And starting from getting this information, having this assessment, we can drive improvement plan, and we can evaluate, and we can work hand to hand with providers year over year to improve the scoring. And we have other more, let's say, operational initiatives that my team is driving. One of them that I can mention, it's about, maybe also if you are familiar with Electrolux, we did some good progress in our green shipping, so ocean shipping. So we succeeded to sign agreement with some key shipping partners company to reduce our sea transport greenhouse gas emission. You know that sea transportation in terms of CO2 emission, it's here we are talking about really huge number in terms of emission. So our ambition is to reduce by 15% during the year. And thanks to this new agreement in place, we really see a solution. We get, again, coming back to the first question about innovation, thanks to also this innovative approach and some good solution proposed by our key partners, we are able now to say that 25% of our total sea freight last year was transported using the most effective solution of decarbonization. So we are talking about biofuel, LNG, etc. So this is one of the good achievement and good, let's say, good initiative that we are currently having. And I can mention others, as you can imagine, also we are talking about logistics, transportation, e-truck, electrification, electrical car, several projects in different countries, and with also tripartite solution, because when we are talking about the end-to-end logistics, you have the ocean part, you have the you can have the warehousing, you have also the road transportation, for example. So it's also, again, connect the dots and connect the different player on the on these end-to-end on this end-to-end partner process, and having also tripartite partnership approach to really connect all the full ecosystem together. And something that we are working also, it's about process and continuous improvement. Just something really simple. If we optimize our flows, if we are able to optimize the way that we are managing our containers, for example, or develop some logistics hubs, just with this simple continuous improvement. Here we are not acting on using less, let's say, less energy, less high consumption energy. We are just working on optimizing our way of working, our flows, our hub. Just again, here to save, to use continuous improvement and process improvement also to identify a solution for more green processes.
That's really fascinating, Anta. Thank you so much. You covered so much ground in just that one answer, everything from different fuels to process management, and also change management you touched on as well, and your relationship with partners and suppliers, and how important that is. And obviously those relationships are really important in logistics, of course. And Hans, I just wanted to ask you, from your perspective, obviously you can't have innovation in isolation. So what is the importance from your perspective of those new partnerships and enhancing collaboration with third parties? Is that something that affects you too?
Yeah, and it's so interesting also to note, let's say also from Anta's answer, it is in a different domain of sustainability, but the key words I think were also mentioned by her, partners, ecosystem. Because indeed, when looking into circularity, and that's really where you see this challenge, like also the journey that we are making, when looking first, starting with low volume, high-end equipment, that's something you can really manage because it is doable. But now think about scaling, getting circular flows for high volume, multiple products, multiple suppliers, whereby we start taking back reprocessing, reprocessing operations, and just think about the collection of used devices from homes, from hospitals, from other users, and the impact that has on processes like collecting, transport, sorting. And then, like an industry, like also the perspective of not manufacturing, but reprocessing, which has different impacts and insights. And then the big question comes up, can you do that alone? As OEM, we are already managing a huge linear supply chain. And then when you look at the circular perspective, it is really important that we get players who can act on these roles, like in collection, like in reverse transport, like in reprocessing operations, who are getting good in that. And that's why I think it's important to work in consortia, in collaboration. That example that I mentioned of the DICE consortium, it's really like looking at a scope of products being digital health devices, and then working with consortium partners, whereby it is really a combination of parties who are involved in collection methods, recyclers, universities, and OEMs, to look into the solutions. And that is the only way how it really works, and how you can also make it good and workable from, let's say, the customer perspective as well. Because in the end, in order to give it back, you must also have good solutions to give it back, and because otherwise you won't do it.
Possibly a good follow-on from what you were just talking about, Hans. We've got a question here from one of our audience members, Stefano, apologies, whichever is how you pronounce it, has asked a question to Electrolux. Do you work also on Scope 3 emissions? Do you try to have circularity at the end of life of your products?
Yes.
And if yes, could you elaborate on that?
Yes, sure. It's a very good question, and for sure, it's also part of. I mentioned about Scope 1 and 2, but it's really important that we say that yes, again for Scope 3, we decreased by 25% compared to 2015. So 2015, let's say 8 years ago. So it's really in line with our company's target of reducing by 25% by 2025. So we are working on with a science-based target. Don't want to enter too much in technical details, but we have a commitment that we keep on Paris climate agreement with the global warming below 1.5 degree, and we are really, let's say, proud to say that we are achieving our first ambitious science-based target, and we are really working to make our food economy fit with all these science-based target initiatives. And a lot of initiative about also circularity, and we are really again having one objective on offering better solution. For example, energy and water efficiency in our product, in our washing machine, for example, or in everything. We have a lot of great example, and also we are having some initiative on recycled plastic. So if I take refrigeration, we have 70% of recycled plastic in the line, and also components, let's say more than 5,000 components tested for chemical compliance. So all these small initiatives are part of a circularity targets that all our organizations are driving.
Excellent. Thank you for answering that. I hope, Stefano, that answers your question. We're going to end our first poll now and review some of the results. Anta and Hans, I don't know if you click the poll button on that bottom of the Zoom call, I don't know if you see it there, you might be able to look at them. If not, I can just read them out to you. Can you see those results on the bottom of the Zoom call? Well,
I'm just looking. Yeah.
I can tell you that with the largest share of votes, with 30% of the votes for the challenges of sustainability, was lack of visibility was was voted to be the biggest challenge, followed closely behind by short-term costs, and then after that, lack of expertise. And so we're seeing there that key element of visibility, you know, when it comes to the challenges of sustainability, that collaborating with partners and securing internal support for change were down in the last places. But any thoughts about that? That key element of visibility when implementing sustainable initiatives? As well as
surprised. I was thinking that the securing internal support for change will come on the top 3, because that's really you know, surprising for me, because short time cost, you know, I'm not surprised to see this one on the but the internal, because when we are talking about sustainability, it's also how to align priorities, and having I talked about change management previously, so that's why this one was something, but really yes, and lack of expertise, and lack of maybe I will let Hans maybe 2 comments from you and from your perspective.
Yeah, I actually recognize the poll very much, also from the experience that we have. And by the way, that change management perspective, I think that's a red thread throughout the change that we are making. Because let's face it, most of us are really linear trained. We've done this for years, and we've executed this for years, and now we need a change of mindset. So change management, I think, is key, but maybe so key that it is a common denominator, because also it affects those top three. And let's start with visibility. Indeed, I guess like the elements that Ante, you mentioned, like in transport, etc. There you need that view of your total supply chain, which often is already in linear supply chain quite difficult. But also in circularity, it is a hot topic. Like, where are your devices? How do I get them back? And the contact to the customers. How do I plan it? What's the forecasting, etc. for it? So visibility, I totally recognize. My favorite one is the short-term cost, because we start up initiatives in something new, which means that actually the processes in which we do it are pilot scale, low quantities. We are really starting and highly manual because we don't have the system and the system automation yet. And that is really a hill that we have to climb first, because we have to imagine, like, in the end, in 3, 5, 10 years from now, circularity is a given, and it needs to be a scaled operation. So we must take the point, like, okay, maybe at this moment we have to do pilots which have a cost, but we need that to develop the processes and the automation to really make it cost effective. So always what we try to do in our projects is to take, like, okay, what are we doing now in the pilot, and what's the long-term perspective when we are scaling it. And by the way, one advice I could provide there is also try to look into pilots that give an immediate value. For instance, if you have a pilot for circularity and you can solve also a shortage issue by doing the pilot, and then immediately you grab the attention and you can, in a pilot, already give a business value. So select your pilots very well, and select pilots that can give you, that can help solve a issue through circularity. And so then immediately you have a proof point. And then expertise, yeah, that's innovation, because we are working in a new domain. Circular supply chain, I think, is a exciting new domain for supply chain management. It's just starting, and so I think, and I really would invite to everybody to step on board on this and build this new expertise across the industry.
Yeah, I really share your comments about the short time cost, because as working on a purchasing organization, you know, as you can imagine, when we are preparing and coming with our business case, and also the way that we build the business case by taking into account the fact that sometimes we lack of visibility and expertise, just to link with the other answers. And it's here it's really a challenge. And I agree on the fact that you need, again, to identify the wins that you have on the piloting approach. But also from my perspective, it's you can have some initiative that can bring some quick wins without a lot of investment. I was talking about process improvement, for example. Here, you can, by having this, reflection on just how we fulfill our containers and between the size of a washing machine or a small appliance that we have, like microwave, how we can just optimize this. This is not so costly in terms of innovation, and it can bring a lot of value. So how you can balance with some quick wins with other initiatives that maybe the ROI is more long term, and to keep this sort of balance, to continue, step by step to get. So this is also the challenge that I see from some example that I have in mind that we see in electronics.
Well, thank you for your thoughts on that poll. To our viewers, I'm going to launch our second poll now. We're going to move from the challenges to the opportunities of sustainable supply chains. And so the question here is, what do you think is the greatest benefit to be gained from unlocking the sustainable supply chain? And again, you have one choice here out of this time you have 6 options. Those 6 options, I'll launch it now, but those 6 options are customer loyalty, long-term cost savings, complying with regulations, ethical responsibility, workforce cultural buy-in, and securing material availability. And I can see that people have started voting on those already. And so we'll get back to those in about 10, 15 minutes or so before we finish. And so, yes, you were both reflecting on those challenges there, which was really interesting to hear. And I suppose one of the things I wanted to ask was, when it comes to implementing, how can you implement and benefit from a sustainability cost modeling system? Maybe if Hans, if we start with you there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Especially when you look into circularity, you see that's really the domain I'm working in. And cost modeling, we found that there's a real important perspective of setting up circular supply chain or setting up circular business models, because this is wider. So when we look at linear value stream mapping, it's pretty straightforward, and it ends at our point of sale. Often we incorporate and also service. But now you have to incorporate your future use cycles, which can be a second life through refurbishment. It can also be that you retain value through parts recovery, for instance, whereby you reuse parts as spare parts. And also the cost or revenue of good recycling needs to be incorporated. And so basically, you have to bring into your cost modeling those elements of the second life and the reuse of the materials and parts, which is not in the same time scope as your linear supply chain, because it can be that your second life is 10, 15 years, maybe even after your actual sale. So that is really a challenge in your business model and in your decision models for the circular business model and also for your circular supply chain. That is one element, and the other element that I would like to add there is also the real cost of the supply, because you might argue that in that competition for the linear supply of materials and the circular materials, do we apply the right costing? So how do we work, for instance, with CO2 charges or the impact of the CO2 of the linear supply chain? So how is that attributed in the cost modeling? And that would make the competition between, let's say, circular and linear fairer. Because now very often we know circular is way better, but in terms of the cost modeling and financial competitiveness, it's a difficult battle. So cost modeling is really one of the areas where we are developing, and which is important to also develop further on. And in a project, I would always advise to bring that element in. Maybe we cannot quantify everything yet, but understanding the mechanisms and the elements is important.
I've got another question here from our audience for Anta. You mentioned that you were able, this is from Michelle, thank you Michelle for the question. You mentioned that you were able to reduce your carbon emissions on sea transport. Was that all driven by different fuels, or were there other factors at play?
No, it's a mix. For sure, it's a huge different fuels, but it's also optimize our routes. Because just to give you an example, if you go from let's say there are a lot of product coming from Asia, for example. So if we did some analysis on the routes from Shanghai, for example, to Sydney, or from Shanghai to Europe, or according to the port of destination, the most, let's say, relevant solution, sustainable solution between using the biofuel and the normal, let's say, shipping, to try to find the best solution. So it's about, again, analysis on the flow and the process, and also the usage of biofuel, because it's not make sense to, we are looking for reducing our CO2 emission. So maybe more makes sense if you have routes from Shanghai to Sydney to use the normal fuel and prioritize the biofuel from Shanghai to Europe, or to have a solution from Shanghai instead of Hamburg Port, stopped in Turkey, for example, and from Turkey to Hamburg, use the an electric truck, for example. Again, it's just to try to give some concrete example on the approach that we took. So it's not only focused on let's find other kind of energy. So we are really looking at other indirect solution that can help for these reduction of the CO2 in sea transportation.
Great, thank you, Anta. That's really interesting perspective there, taking into account the optimization as well as biofuel. Michelle, I hope that answered your question. Hans, I wanted to ask you, when it comes to legislation, which is obviously a big driver when it comes to implementing sustainable change, what key changes have you noted when it comes to legislation? What are your thoughts around navigating regulations and things like that?
Yeah, good point. Because also there you see that once you start working in projects on circularity, and then you come to some hurdles that are very often related also to regulations. Because also many regulations are quite linear based or have a certain focus on certain products. Just to mention now a few examples, we are in the medical regulated industry, which means that every product that we bring to market is heavily regulated. And then you come with circularity, you come to the point where you start reusing used products. And then how well is the regulations described and fit the purpose? And also, like, how does regulation enable the circularity? And so one of the purposes as well in that consortium that we mentioned is like, okay, how does also, for instance, the regulation like EU MDR impact the potential for circularity? And with the feedback to the EU, like if we would like to see changes in the regulations where let's say the regulation can hamper the development of circular solutions, and because there's always that balancing act that you have to make. But also consider another element that we find, like when you take back devices with digital content, what about the digital security? So all digital security legislation, but also customs and taxes. What about when you start transporting used devices across the globe, even in the EU taxes, but also outside of the EU? And once you dive into that, you see that there is quite some import and export restrictions on used equipment. Also, by the way, very good, because like, for instance, in Africa, there's quite some anti-dump regulations, so prohibiting the import of used devices. But it is an element whereby these regulations can also hamper the second life or the application of refurbished device or refurbished operations.
Hans, we have a question here from one of our audience members. Forgive me if I mispronounce your name, but I think it's Govindarajan. And it's a question, I wonder what you'll think of it. What are the initiatives to consider when the recycled product reaches the end of its second life? Because obviously you then still have old equipment and that inventory starts to pile up. And so what do? You got your plan for the end of first life and then there's the end of second life. And is there something you can tell us about that?
It's very good to incorporate all these stages. So you have to look into all the loops. I think that's foremost the most important. And indeed, we have to also, when looking into the circular economy, we will have that perspective of take back and triage. So whatever brings value, and there's also demand for that value, you have to bring that in there. And that's kind of also an interesting planning challenge, because you get devices back in various conditions. And you look into what's my demand for refurbished devices or for recovered spare parts. And then in the end, it's also based on the condition of the device, or because there's no demand for second use anymore, or it is really, let's say, on the technical end of life, and then comes the recycling stage. And that's also one of those very interesting areas where we have to consider, to make the consideration for the full chain, because you see that, first of all, our products need to get designed for circularity, which is enabling refurbishment, parts recovery, etc., but also enabling recycling, recyclable materials, etc. So quite some effort is taken there. But then there's also there a tremendous challenge for supply chain, because you can have a perfectly designed for recycling device, but then you find out that the disassembly costs so much time that no recycler will ever disassemble your device to bring it back to the raw materials. And so when you go to a recycler, and actually every supply chain person should go to a recycler to see what happens, because most of the materials are just crushed for recycling. And really, if we want to move to upcycling and retain the value, we should consider also there, like on one hand side, recyclability, real recyclability, and on the other hand, like, okay, how can we make that cost effective, that we break the materials down to the pure products down to the pure materials.
Okay, thank you. I hope that answers the question from the audience member. That's really, really interesting, Hans. I'm going to end our second poll, and we can share the results with you. Are you able to see that, Anta and Hans?
Yeah.
So ethical responsibility has come out as the front runner for the opportunities, the benefits to be gained from unlocking the sustainable supply chain. And then looking at some of those other results from that poll, what are your thoughts? Maybe starting with Anta.
I think it's for me, when I see ethical responsibility, it's also about driving our business also to be loyal with the customer. So I'm linking these both elements. Indeed, as a global organization, I think more and more, I talk a lot about awareness, making people aware about just the fact that we have this responsibility now to do the things differently. And just to open awareness about the emergency of tackling the climate change. It's about preparing the next generation for a better world. Sorry, I'm a little bit not perfect using, but for me, so this, I think this is completely aligned with the fact that it's really an ethical responsibility. Today, as individual at home, we need to take some decision, and the people need to, again, aware about the way that we was doing the things maybe 20 years ago. Now it's to change the behaviors. And so it's more individual, but it's also collective. And collective, it's with the organization that we are working on, and each organization, in my point of view, have also this responsibility to support this change and to support this move to just address the climate challenge. So I'm fully aligned with this. So it's not about making more business. It's not about an economic. It's about just an environmental an environmental challenge that all of us need to take. So I think it's, I agree with this assumption on putting ethical responsibility as a first in terms of opportunities. And then long-term savings come after. If we can do it with savings, that's great. But the most important is really to be one of just to drive this change we individually, but also with our organization.
Yeah, it was a surprising result, but it's really encouraging. I think it says a lot about the values of our audience today. Hans, What are your thoughts looking at these?
I cannot agree more.
Sorry?
I cannot agree more because I'm very happy with the outcome of this poll. Because indeed, it shows that, let's say, the stewardship of our globe in terms of CO2 emissions and the material use has really come into that point of the ethical values that we have. So we need to really work on that. And we have been dominated by economic growth, etc., all the time. So I think this is really great. On the other hand, and that's also what as supply chain community we need to realize is like, okay, on one hand side, we realize that we must do something in that stewardship for our globe. So that's where we are at a steering wheel. So that's good. We can do something. And on the other hand, we still have the businesses that we work in, which indeed, so everything that we do must also still serve our companies, revenues, etc. And that's also where the challenge is. So on one hand side, do what's needed to take that responsibility. And on the other hand, make it happen in a cost-effective way, in such a way that it also happens, that we're not pushed back because of failing business cases, etc. I mentioned the cost modeling, I mentioned the scaling, and that's important that we kind of enable that perspective and also that discussion. And I think that's great and important to see that we start from our ethical responsibility. Very good.
Great. Thank you for those reflections. And yeah, it's a very interesting set of results there. Before we wrap up, we're coming to the end of our webinar. I just wanted to ask a final question. Have you discussed greater AI implementation in light of recent developments in this space? Maybe Anta, if we start with you.
Yes, for sure. It's a good question because one word that's coming a lot in our organization is sustainability, and the second word is digitalization. So this question is really, let's say, on the actual news and actual challenge that we are working on. We are now willing to accelerate our digital transformation journey. For us, it's a little bit the same as sustainability. We cannot play without considering a strong digitalization approach. And we know that digitalization is now a key enabler to reach operational efficiency. And it will also help us to have a closer integration with our suppliers and to push for sustainable business practices. So I thought that when we talked about innovation, I was also, if you remember, mentioning that we are also using innovation to collect the data report, because when we need to get a strong tool to be able to really again push these the business practices and get the relevant data at the right time to drive the business and to drive the decision. So we are really working and willing, and what we are asking to our partners, key logistics partners, it's again not only to reduce and to propose the innovative solution to use the biofuel instead of normal fuel. It's also about coming with some innovative solution to follow up, to be able to analyze the process, etc. I think IoT enable really to have a lifelong relationship between producer and customer. But from the other hand, it requires also a really high standard of data security and the privacy. And it also requires solid data management process and tools. So it's in our long-term roadmap, but we are prioritizing really to have this solid first data management process and tools, and also again, a lot of regulation and a lot of things around data security, privacy, cybersecurity, all these stuff that had been, we are looking for winning more maturity on that before ready to push for IoT solution. So we are more on a step-by-step approach, and it's on our more long-term roadmap using IoT.
Okay, great. Thanks, Anta. I can see we had a question about digitization as well, and so that's helpful to sort of answer that. Hans, Just some thoughts from you before we finish about that AI question and other technological changes.
I fully agree there. It's we are at the stage where we first have to start at the basics. We have to first enable our supply chains, and that is by pilots, that's just doing and making it happen. We should not wait for AI or digitization to make it happen, because otherwise we're just waiting, and let's start doing now, and let's start learning by doing. I think that's the first and foremost important. Having said that, I think AI digitization has a great potential in this area. Thinking about indeed, so in circularity, if we can have product recognition in our collection and sorting, thinking about recycling, product recognition, so that you can upcycle rather than downcycle. Take the materials out because recyclers recognize the product. If we can have the product recognition or the tracking for planning of our circular supply chains, seeing what supply is coming in circular, so that we can fine-tune new buys based on that planning perspective. And so I see a world of opportunities there, but I think we should put that in a kind of parallel development process, whereby on one hand side, learn by doing, get started, and don't bother about technology yet. Get it also working in your base systems, and then in parallel develop on the opportunities that AI may provide there, so that in the end we have a kind of concurrent engineering, so that we can really make it happen in a few years from now. We worked decades for linear. We have to realize this in years for circular.
Yeah, thank you, Hans. That's a very measured and engaging response to that question. We've come to the end of today's webinar. I want to thank you both, Ante and Hans, for your thoughts and insights today. It's been a really enlightening conversation. I hope our audience agrees, and I hope you've both enjoyed it too. I also want to thank everyone who attended the webinar, asked questions and completed those 2 polls. I hope you enjoyed this session, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future at another Reuters Events webinar. Thank you again both, and goodbye everyone.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.